guards exposed as they refused the old man until an incredible 4-star general discovered the truth about a forgotten hero in their midst. Jack stood at the entrance of the charity facility, clutching the hand-stitched badge on his well-worn uniform. Memories of valor hung like shadows over him, a stark contrast to his current struggle. Once, he fought bravely for his country, but now, at 75, he was waging a more personal war against neglect. His hands trembled, both from age and the cold sting of isolation that had become his unwelcome companion. He inhaled deeply, attempting to summon the lingering strength of the soldier he once was. But his brain was clouded with doubts that burned in his chest. He had never felt so small. The 2 guards stationed at the entrance were young enough to be his grandsons, standing tall with dismissive postures, arms crossed like barricades. Their gaze pierced through him, implicit from their confident sneers that his tattered uniform was all they saw, a relic of a bygone era that no longer commanded respect. "We can't let you in," one guard spat, contempt dripping from his words. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The rejection was a gut punch, a fresh wound reopened by their callousness. "What do you mean?" Jack's voice cracked, disbelief drowning in his words. "I just need help for my friend Tom. He's sick." He hesitated, grappling with the weight of their dismissive expressions. He didn't just want help, he craved validation, a simple recognition that the years of loyalty to his country counted for something. But they remained unmoved, eyes flicking over him as if he were invisible, an echo of a history they weren't inclined to honor. His fists clenched. The sharp bite of indignation surged through him, stubbornness boiling beneath the surface. Could this be the legacy he was leaving? Memories haunted him, the camaraderie, the sacrifices. Now, it was all tarnished by the thought of being forgotten, discarded. The unease gripped his heart, but with it came a fierce determination. They would not reduce him to a relic without a voice. "Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." Jack turned away from the guards, his heart racing. Rage and despair battled within him like 2 stubborn foes. Could he confront his own community, now indifferent to the legacy he represented? The thought alone set his teeth on edge, yet the urge to fight for his story surged stronger. He contemplated the uniform that hung off him like a ghost of valor, reminding him of battles fought and allies lost. This wasn't just about him. It was about all the men who never returned, their stories quieted like whispers in the wind. As he stepped away from the facility, Jack felt the unbearable pressure of time pressing on his shoulders. Memories threatened to slip away like grains of sand, lost to shifting tides. He clenched his jaw, determination set in his sharp gaze. This fight was just beginning, and somewhere, somehow, he would make them remember. The thought of General Peterson flickered into his mind, a leader who understood sacrifice. If anyone could help, it would be him. Perhaps then, the truth would rise from the ashes of neglect, igniting recognition and respect for those whose worth exceeded the weight of their years. Jack's mind instantly conjured the familiar image of General Peterson, standing tall with that charismatic glimmer in his eyes, a man who embodied leadership, bravery, and respect. This was the man Jack had served alongside in the thick of battle, the one who always fought for the voices that struggled to be heard. The idea of reaching out to him suddenly transformed into a guiding light through the murky labyrinth of despair he found himself in. With renewed resolve, Jack headed towards the small, nondescript diner down the street where Peterson often lunched when he visited the town for charity events. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet he pushed onward. He needed to remind himself who he was, not just as a soldier, but as a man who had endured flames of war and emerged on the other side not just alive but scarred and still ready to make a difference. As he reached the diner, he paused, peering through the glass windows at the soft, warm light just inside. The small space hummed with the comforting sounds of clattering plates and low conversations, yet his heart raced with uncertainty. Would the general recognize him? Would he dismiss Jack, just as those guards had? Taking a deep breath, he opened the door and stepped inside, the jingle of the bell announcing his arrival. The scent of coffee and fried food enveloped him immediately, but it was the sight of the general that drew him in. Peterson sat alone in a booth, absorbed in reading the newspaper, his chin resting on his folded hands. Jack hesitated. This was a man used to admiration, and he wasn't sure if he had the courage to disturb that bubble of normalcy, but then the thought of Tom, sick and in need of help, sparked a flame of bravery. Jack made his way to the booth, his palms sweaty against the fabric of his uniform. "General Peterson?" Jack's voice, though shaky, was firm, cutting through the din around him. The general looked up and squinted against the light before smiling, a flash of recognition igniting in his eyes. "Jack. My old friend. It's been years." The warmth of the greeting momentarily bolstered Jack's resolve, but the next words tumbled from his mouth at lightning speed, a jumbled blend of desperation and urgency. "I need to talk to you. It's about those guards down at the charity facility. They wouldn't let me in, and it's not just me, it's about honoring the legacy we fought for. They need to understand." He watched the flicker of concern cross the general's face. Peterson motioned for the waitress to bring over 2 coffees, then gestured for Jack to sit. As he slid into the booth across from the general, he felt the unnerving battle within himself subside just slightly. His heart still raced, but he now had a sense of purpose. "Tell me everything," Peterson said, leaning slightly closer, his demeanor changing from casual to serious. Jack poured out the story, the neglect, the urgency of retrieving the past's dignity in a world that had skated into apathy. He felt the tension uncoil as the general listened intently, absorbing his words, acknowledging the struggle. As Jack explained the circumstances surrounding Tom's sickness, he noticed the general furrow his brow in concentration, synonyms of respect and valor etching themselves back into the atmosphere. This was exactly the affirmation he had craved, the sense that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still room for heroism beyond mere memory. Yet, as Jack spoke, he discovered something vital awakening in himself. This fight was not limited to retrieval of a forgotten past, it was about claiming a voice and standing up against indifference. Then, the general's response hit like a drum, a promise that he wouldn't let this issue fade into the shadows again. "The time has come to face this head-on, Jack," General Peterson declared, his tone resolute. "I'll make sure the right people hear your story. But I need you to join me. Are you up for the challenge?" The words ignited a new fire within Jack, but he understood that embracing this challenge meant confronting not only the indifference from those who forgot but also the echoes of his own doubts that had lingered for far too long. "Absolutely, sir," he replied, determination boiling in his veins. "Together, we'll make them see." In that moment, Jack realized he was reclaiming more than just his voice, he was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. But as they began to outline their plan, a thought began to gnaw at him: were they prepared to face the true power of apathy? The very foundation he hoped to build on might just expose deeper shadows than they anticipated. The diner began to blur around Jack as he immersed himself in the weight of Peterson's invitation. His pulse quickened, a mix of fear and excitement swirling within. The general's presence felt like a lifeline, but this wasn't just about him. The stakes had escalated considerably. He needed to rise, to be more than a soldier carrying memories. He had to become a leader in this battle against apathy. "Where do we start?" Jack asked, focusing on the general's unwavering gaze. As the urgency of their conversation deepened, he felt something shift within himself, a burgeoning sense of responsibility. Peterson took a thoughtful sip of coffee, considering the words. "We must gather evidence, Jack. Stories from the men and women who served with us. We need tangible arguments to present before the right people." "I can reach out to some of the veterans from my unit," Jack responded, his mind firing with names. Every recollection was a reminder of camaraderie, of shared struggles that formed unbreakable bonds. They could reshape the narrative, give voice to the forgotten. Excellent, Peterson nodded. But remember, our approach must be firm yet respectful. We're not just demanding action, we're fostering understanding. Jack leaned back, absorbing the weight of that statement. He had spent too long feeling powerless. This was his chance to forge a path not just for himself and Tom, but for all the veterans whose sacrifices had been relegated to silence. He felt the flicker of a plan igniting, a vision forming of what could be as they talked strategy, ideas flowed between them, intertwining like the steam rising from their coffees. Jack realized his confidence was growing. He was no longer just following Peterson's lead, he was contributing, shaping their mission, but lurking beneath that growing resolve was a flicker of dread. He had never faced an institution built on the indifference of those who should have cared. What if they dismissed their pleas? What if he failed to rally support among his brothers in arms? The thought clawed at him, yet it was a reminder that he was not alone. There was strength in unity, responsibility threaded through shared experience. Jack, Peterson interrupted his spiraling thoughts, this will likely be met with pushback. It's not just about getting the right people to listen, but navigating the bureaucracies in place. We will need to be prepared for resistance. His heart sank momentarily, but he straightened in his seat. Then we prepare. We gather our stories and present them compellingly. They can't ignore us if we come with a united front. Peterson met his gaze, approval gleaming in his eyes. You've got the right spirit. The courage to stand up for what you believe in speaks volumes. Let that fuel your drive. Fueled by Peterson's faith in him, Jack envisioned their first meeting. He would coordinate with the veterans, organize the narratives, and combine experiences into a tangible plea. There could be power in words that transcended mere nostalgia, compelling others to act. He could feel his past training returning, a fire igniting memories of camaraderie, loyalty, and sacrifice. Tomorrow, I'll start reaching out, Jack resolved, rising from the booth with more certainty than he had felt in years. The sense of purpose that enveloped him was palpable, yet so too was the nascent fear of the impending confrontation with the complicity of indifference that blighted the charity facility. But as he left the diner, imbued with a mission, a knot settled deep in his chest. Reclaiming the voices of the past required him to confront something he had evaded for too long, his own battle with worthiness, his own fear of stepping into the limelight of leadership. Would he be able to shoulder that burden? Suddenly, doubt clawed back, terrifying and familiar. What if I fail? Echoed in his mind as he walked away. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the street, and he paused, glancing back at the diner where Peterson was content, sipping coffee, well aware of the fight that lay ahead. Jack closed his eyes for a breath, focusing on the resolve that had driven him this far. He had something to prove, and not just to others, but to himself. As he walked, every step ignited a belief deep within. It was time to engage meaningfully and demand change. But would he unravel in the process? Could he truly rise to the challenge of breaking through to those blinded by indifference? The questions hung thick in the air, leaving him tense, pushing him forward into the daunting task ahead, one that might change everything. The morning broke with a clear sky, a deceptive calm that contrasted sharply with the churning anxiety in Jack's chest. He sat at his kitchen table, a faded laptop open in front of him, yet he found himself staring vacantly at the screen. The plan loomed: contacting veterans, collecting stories, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. How could he effectively voice the silent screams of his brothers and sisters in arms? With a deep breath, Jack forced himself to type the names of veterans from his unit, each a flicker of memory. But as he encountered the first name, the familiar knot tightened again. Could he truly reach out to them? What if they didn't want to relive those moments? What if they had moved on, left the past behind? He rubbed his temples, frustration boiling just beneath the surface. This was about more than nostalgia, it was about action and change, yet the path felt mired in doubt. His phone buzzed, breaking through the haze of his thoughts. A text from a fellow veteran, Brian, sparkled on the screen. "Hey Jack, long time no talk. How's it going? Jack looked at the message, hesitating. This was at an opening, a potential path to rekindle ties, but what would he say? He forced a reply, something casual. Going okay. Have some important stuff on my mind. You free to chat? Before he could second-guess himself, he hit send. As he waited for a response, he felt a stirring of resolve. Perhaps this was the step he needed to boost his confidence. Yet the ensuing silence gnawed at him, amplifying his insecurity. Was he already failing before beginning? Brian replied just minutes later, absolutely. Let's grab a drink. I'll be around. Jack suppressed a sigh of relief, excitement mingling with fear. As he stepped out of his front door, the world felt vividly alive, each sound amplified, every sensation more intense. He realized this would be a conversation that could ignite the fire in him or snuff it out entirely. At the bar, the familiar atmosphere enveloped him, a sanctuary of camaraderie. Brian arrived shortly after, an easy smile on his face that instantly put Jack at ease. They exchanged pleasantries, but Jack felt the urgency pulsating beneath their casual banter. What's on your mind? Brian asked, his tone turning serious. It's about the veterans, our struggles since returning. I want to gather some stories, our experiences. Not just for nostalgia, but to make some noise about how we're treated, Jack said, his voice steady despite the trepidation swirling inside. Brian's face shifted, reflecting curiosity mixed with skepticism. You think we can make a difference? It's worth a try, Jack replied, rallying his conviction. I believe it's time we stepped up, shared our stories instead of letting them fade into nothing. Brian leaned in. What stories do you have in mind? Jack felt a rush of urgency suffusing him. He thought of Tom, of the men who had fought beside them, their experiences buried beneath indifference. I want to show that our battles didn't end when we returned home. Can you help me gather voices? We need a united front. The words felt liberating, their weight shifting from his shoulders. Brian studied him before nodding slowly. Yeah, man. Count me in. This is important. Jack's heart soared with the acceptance, but underneath it, doubt lingered like a persistent shadow. What if they couldn't find enough support? What if they faced hostility instead of understanding? Let us brainstorm some ideas. We need to present our case compellingly, Jack suggested, adrenaline igniting in his veins. They spent the next hour discussing potential strategies, the tension easing as enthusiasm replaced Jack's initial fear. By the end of their meeting, they left the bar with a newfound sense of purpose, Jack's carefully constructed plans transforming into something tangible. They agreed to reach out to others, gathering like-minded veterans. Still, as Jack walked home, the nagging fear clawed back again. Leading this effort meant exposing himself, stepping into the spotlight he'd long avoided. Was he truly ready for that? Now the evening sun cast long shadows, and he couldn't shake the sense that a confrontation loomed. Jack knew risks lay ahead, but the commitment felt exhilarating, pushing him toward something new and uncharted. As he unlocked the door to his home, one question left a lingering weight: what if this journey revealed more than just their stories? What if, in the process, he discovered the courage he never realized he had? The thought electrified him, pushing him forward as he vowed to seize the moment. Tomorrow would bring the first calls and emails. Would he rise to the occasion, or would the fear that had haunted him indulge in another chance to silence his voice? The next day loomed heavy before Jack, like an approaching storm cloud filled with electric promise and paralyzing fear. He sat at his kitchen table again, the laptop open to a blank screen, the cursor blinking mockingly. The plans he and Brian concocted last night felt thrilling yet daunting. This morning, however, they seemed like chains to a wild horse. His first instinct was to stall, to retreat into the comforting inertia of his old routine. But glancing at his phone, he saw the text thread with Brian, their shared determination reflected back at him. He felt a spark of resolve ignite within him. He forced himself to pick up the phone and scroll through his contacts until he reached the first name, Tom. Tom had always been the heart of their unit, a well of stories that could draw anyone in. Jack hesitated, his finger hovering over the call button. What if Tom wasn't ready to speak? What if he buried those memories deep, not wanting to be disturbed? Jack's heart raced, not just from the anticipation of reaching Tom but from the haunting possibility of rejection. Get it together, he muttered to himself, shaking off the doubt that gripped him like a vice. He hit the call button before his mind could convince him otherwise. The ringing seemed endless, every tone amplifying his growing anxiety. Just as he thought about hanging up, Tom's familiar voice broke through. "Hey, Jack. Long time. What's up?" "Hey, Tom. I've got something important to talk about," Jack said, trying to keep his tone steady, despite the tremor lurking beneath. "Sure. What's going on?" Jack took a deep breath. "I want to gather stories from our time in the service. I think it's important to share what we went through and how it's affected us since coming home. I could really use your help." A silence extended over the line, thick and laden with unspoken memories. Jack's stomach dropped. He knew Tom well enough to understand the weight of shared experiences. Jack pressed onward, refusing to wallow in uncertainty. "We have a chance to bring awareness to our struggles, Tom. To make sure it doesn't happen to others." Tom sighed. "I don't know, man. It's a lot to unpack. The past isn't always easy to revisit. I get that. But that's why I need you. Your story matters. It could help others in ways we didn't even realize." Jack's voice was firm, the conviction clearer now as he articulated the very purpose that had felt so bewildering the night before. There was another pause, and Jack almost thought Tom might decline. But then came a whisper of hope. "All right, let's meet. We can talk." Jack felt his spirits lift, one voice secured, a small victory against the tempest of doubt that threatened to engulf him. Over the next few days, Jack worked tirelessly. He reached out to more veterans, powered by renewed determination. Each conversation felt monumental, both a challenge and an unveiling. As he collected stories that had long been stifled, Jack uncovered a reservoir of courage within himself. It wasn't just about listening, he was becoming an advocate, using those voices to weave a narrative larger than his own. Through late-night calls and coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions, he connected with more veterans, each agreeing to contribute. But beneath the surface of the burgeoning project, fear bubbled. Each new voice brought the revelation of hard truths, and he began to wonder what that exposure could mean for him personally. What if some of their stories were too painful, too raw? What if the vulnerability broke them apart instead of uniting them? The fear nagged at the edges of his resolve, casting shadows on the bright canvases they started to create. As he sat down one night, revisiting individual narratives, Jack realized he was standing at a crossroads. The clarity of purpose began to cloud with the weight of responsibility. What if the mission he had taken on revealed not only his fellow veterans' battles but his own unspoken demons as well? Jack eyed the screen before him where countless words awaited his interpretation. This wasn't just a collection of stories, it was a mirror reflecting truths he had long evaded. He swallowed hard, the enormity of what lay ahead settling in. With a deep breath, he reached for the keyboard, prepared to confront the depths of their shared pain and his own. But as he pressed the keys to type, something whispered at the back of his mind, a question that could shift everything. What if, instead of healing through these stories, he unearthed something darker that binds them together? The urgency to take the next step coursed through him. Would he brave the risks that lay ahead, wielding the power of vulnerability, or pull back into the shadows where silence reigned? The nights blurred together as Jack immersed himself in the emotional depths of the stories he had collected. His small apartment transformed into a war room of sorts, papers strewn across surfaces like battle plans, each story waiting to be interpreted. He could feel the weight of their shared history pressing down on him, a call to arms that both exhilarated and terrified him. As he sifted through narratives, Jack found himself increasingly aware of the scars lurking beneath the surface, not just in the words written on the pages, but within himself. One afternoon, he read a harrowing account from Danny, a fellow veteran who recounted a split-second decision that led to disastrous consequences. The anguish reflected in Danny's words was a stark reminder of the chaos they had faced together, and Jack's heart ached with empathy. Yet this empathy was complicated by the realization that such stories were not just relics, they held the potential to unearth memories of his own that he wasn't ready to confront. Despite his resolve, Jack felt the looming sense of dread, the fear of what might surface as he pressed forward into the depths of their collective trauma. What if the pain was insurmountable? As he battled through the narratives, Jack reflected on his own experiences, searching for parallels. He had his own shadows, his own unvoiced fears tied to experiences he had avoided reckoning with. Each narrative felt like an invitation to dig deeper, but he struggled with the question, did he have the strength to unearth his own? With his commitment faltering, Jack knew he needed a sounding board. His phone buzzed, a message from Brian blinking ominously on the screen. Jack's heart fluttered at the thought of sharing his internal struggle with someone who had been there from the beginning. He quickly typed a response, arranging to meet at a small diner tucked away in a less frequented part of town. The diner was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of fried foods and nostalgia. As Jack slid into the booth across from Brian, he sensed the weight of expectancy between them. Brian leaned forward, his expression serious. "So, how's it going with the stories?" Jack looked down at his hands, tracing the outline of a calloused scar that told its own story. "It's overwhelming, man. I want to do this, I really do, but it's not just about their stories. Each one pulls me back to things I've buried." Brian paused, concern sharpening his features. "You're going to have to face your own past if you want this to work. You can't just collect their stories as if they don't affect you." Jack felt exposed. What if facing it changes everything? What if it overwhelms me? Then it overwhelms you. Embrace it. You know there's healing in vulnerability. Sometimes you need to chip away at the surface to get to the root. The sincerity in Brian's voice sparked a flicker of bravery within Jack. "You think I can do it?" His eyes met Brian's, searching for affirmation. "You did a hardened tour of duty, man. This project is just a different kind of battle," Brian said, his tone a mixture of reassurance and challenge. With each word, Jack felt a pressure lifting. Facing was no longer just a daunting possibility, it became a necessary endeavor. The thought swirled in his head, sharing his truth might hold the key not just for himself, but for the others who had dared to relinquish their silence. As they spoke, the fear began to evolve into something more tangible, an urgency to transform vulnerability into strength and connection. He was no longer just a passive collector of stories, he was poised to become an active participant in a journey that could redefine him, for better or worse. By the time they parted ways, Jack felt more prepared, but an unsettling question burrowed within him. Could the act of unveiling the past link him not only to the voices of veterans but to the darkest corners of his own psyche? Would he find redemption or revelation, or would it be a deeper isolation? That night, he returned home, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. As he opened his laptop, a new story lingered on his mind, a story that demanded to be articulated. Would he pull from shallow, easy waters, or would he dive into the murky depths of his own fears? As he hesitated, he realized this was the moment everything could change. The cursor blinked impatiently on the screen, waiting for him to take the plunge. But just as he began to type, another thought struck him hard. What if facing that darkness became his greatest strength, or the very thing that shattered everything he thought he knew? Would he go through with it, risking everything? A decision loomed ahead, and the time would come when he would have to confront not just the stories of others, but the one that had been hiding in his own heart. Jack hovered over the keyboard, his fingers trembling like branches in a storm. Each heartbeat echoed in his ears, thump, 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 as if daring him to confront whatever lay buried beneath the surface. He was at a crossroads. The stories demanded to be heard, but they mirrored the echoes of his own silence, the anguish and the turmoil he had fought to forget. With a deep breath, he steeled himself, the memory of Brian's words swirling in his mind like a fighter's rallying cry. This project is just a different kind of battle. The thought ignited something within him. He began to type not just as a collector of stories, but as a soldier stepping back onto the battlefield. He would brave his memories, wielding his vulnerability as a weapon against the dark forces within. The staccato of his keystrokes filled the room, each sentence a shard of glass reflecting both his struggle and determination. But the narrative wasn't flowing as he had hoped. He had envisioned the stories of others pouring out, but each attempt at weaving their narratives reminded him of the gaps in his own. The past loomed over him, a monstrous shadow recalling the nights spent tossing and turning with memories that clung like wet wool. Jack's mind drifted to the day he had lost his friend Mark, the moment frozen in time, a single mistake that haunted him still. Why hadn't he acted differently? The question thrummed like a persistent drumbeat, threatening to sabotage his focus. He leaned back in his chair, frustration boiling within him. The emotional threshold he had been trying to breach felt elusive. Searching for clarity, he closed his eyes, retracing steps of the past. The image of Mark's smile flickered like an old film reel, youthful, full of life. It shifted to the moment when everything changed, the instant that defined him. Jack had stood paralyzed as chaos unfolded, unable to save him from the calamity of that day. Could he channel this heartbreak into insight? He'd been selected to serve but had become a shadow of himself, wrapped in guilt and regret. Jack's hands fell to the keyboard again, and he began to write about the battle that raged within him. Each typed word became an assertion of his existence, a declaration that he would not let Mark's memory or his own fear define him any longer. As the hours slipped away, the darkness began to lift. The narratives transformed in front of him, no longer mere reflections of others' struggles but connections that mirrored his own fractured soul. For the first time, he felt as if he was standing shoulder to shoulder with those he was writing for, fellow soldiers fighting their own wars, overcoming their pasts. The stories, once intimidating, started to feel like a community, a shared way of healing that could become a lifeline for himself and others. The cursor blinked purposefully, urging him forward. Could he really be the voice that transcended the pain? The prospect exhilarated him. Before he knew it, he was drafting an outline that intertwined his journey with theirs, exploring the heavy burden they all carried. The act of articulating his fears served as a poignant reminder that the darkness didn't have to win. In acknowledging their pain, he could reclaim his narrative, potentially offering a guiding light for others. As dawn broke through the window, casting a new hope across his scattered papers, Jack paused. An inner whisper persisted, charming yet disconcerting. Could he unveil the most painful story of all, his own? This was not just his battle now, it was becoming a mission to unite their experiences, amplifying the voices lost within the cacophony of memory. But with excitement bubbled a new tension. Jack realized that the path ahead would demand more than mere reflection. Would he be able to face not just the stories of others, but the gut-wrenching truth that his own life harbored deep scars? The thought clenched tight around his heart. The journey was only beginning. A decision loomed heavily over him. The time would come when he would have to face not just his own fears but confront the narrative threads that tied him to Mark's legacy. It sunk in. He wasn't just a vessel for their stories, he had to uncover his own truth no matter how painful. Would he rise to the challenge, or would he be overwhelmed by the weight of his past? As the first light of morning crept through the curtains, Jack sat poised at the edge of an awakening he had been avoiding for far too long. The moment of truth approached, and with it, the echo of a silent plea, a plea for redemption, for understanding, for freedom from the shadows lingering just out of reach. The sun cast a pale glow on Jack's cluttered desk, illuminating the outline of crumpled papers strewn about. For too long, he had been trendy merely for reflection, tilting at the windmills of self-doubt. Now, amidst the light of day and the intensity of his resolve, he recognized this was only the beginning. Each keystroke urged him onward, demanding both acknowledgement and truth. Jack leaned forward, fists resting on the desk, breath slow and deliberate. He had spent years trying to transform his guilt into silence, but this project, this dialogue with forgotten souls, demanded radical honesty. The specter of Mark loomed larger, intertwining Jack's journey with every story he sought to tell. Anguished by regret, he felt the pulse of a realization: if he didn't confront his narrative, if he didn't excavate the layers of his shame, the entire endeavor would remain hollow, a mere echo of their experiences. He considered the foundation of his mission. What kind of stories did he want to share? Tales of struggle, survival, redemption? But what of his own story? A profound conflict raged within him. Was it cowardice or wisdom that kept him from standing tall amongst his peers, sharing the truth behind the facade of his grueling past? Motivated by clarity, Jack opened a new document and titled it The Unforgivable. He found himself writing with vigor, haunted but steady. The words flowed like the tumult of a river breaking through a dam, raw, powerful, and unfiltered. "The day Mark died was the day I was reborn," he wrote. It was a bold proclamation, though still shackled by his sorrow. Honesty sprinted ahead as Jack began to recount the day of the tragedy, the choices and consequences that had spiraled into horror. Each emotion was a wave crashing against the shore of his consciousness. Regret, guilt, anger, an omnipresent tide threatening to pull him under. Yet, he fought to stay afloat, organizing his thoughts into something coherent and meaningful. He had to partake in the balance. Their stories could not stack upon his own unrealized truth. With every word, Jack began to unearth forgotten memories, snapshots of love and laughter eclipsed by shadows of could-have-beens. Through the painful lens of recollection, he felt the weight of taking responsibility carries an unbearable burden, yet was necessary if he were to rise. What had been an unbearable story transformed into an opportunity for transformation, proving to him that he could shine a light into the darkness. The more Jack confessed to the page, the more he felt an unshackling, a reawakening that allowed him to realize he was not just revealing his past but would also be reconstructing it. Rewriting the story meant embracing his truth with grace. He pondered what it meant to be a voice for the voiceless while still being ensnared by his silence. But what if the burden he shouldered was shared by more than just him? What if others felt equally obliged to confront their demons? Could this project become a repository for healing, an altar for redemption? Jack's breath quickened at the potential. Now, the question loomed larger than ever: would he dare include his pain amongst the stories of those he admired? Could he strip himself bare and lay his vulnerabilities alongside theirs, showing that strength could emerge from loss? The cursor blinked defiantly, demanding an answer. Jack steeled himself, ready to commit. There was no more room to hide. He had to step up. The start of his narrative awaited, relentless and unapologetic. But as he reached for the keys, a new thought flickered in his mind, chilling his nerves. What if revealing his deepest scars put all his relationships at risk? Eager to open up, there lay apprehension about how both the living and the dead would perceive his testimony. Yet, the prospect of being a beacon braving the dark waters of vulnerability demanded action, confrontation. The moment came. What stood at the edge was not merely an invitation for expression, it was a kind of confession, a cathartic leap into the abyss of his existence. How could he brave the waters of his past without sinking? Resolved, Jack began to type. Each letter forged a connection to the myriad challenges faced, an individual yet collective fight against their pasts. And then, inevitably, a larger question emerged: was he ready to share it all? As doubts mingled with a surge of determination, he became aware that the real confrontation awaited him not only within the confines of his office but also with those who mattered: his friends, those who knew Mark, and ultimately, himself. The journey continued, unraveling before him, pulling him into the depths. Would he be courageous enough to untangle the threads of his life, weaving them into a narrative worthy of both his pain and the legacies of others? The stakes rose as he began to truly comprehend. Vulnerability was not merely a catharsis, it was a battle. Sitting alone, Jack felt the rushing tide of his own heartbeat. The real work had only begun. As he faced this daunting decision, would he have the courage to confront the echoes of his past and the secrets threatening to drown him? He began to feel the burn of adrenaline coursing through him, juxtaposed against a familiar sense of dread. Jack tapped his fingers lightly against the keyboard, hesitating. Each stroke seemed to carry a weight. How could he transform his inner turmoil into words that resonated with others? He pondered those first few lines, wondering if there was a right way to unveil the tangled saga of his past. With a sigh, he pushed the initial draft aside. The haunting presence of Mark lingered in the air, urging him deeper into the fabric of his narrative. What had been merely an exploration of guilt and loss was morphing into an assertion of self, a manifesto of personal redemption. Yet the fear of judgment remained an unyielding fog, a chilling reminder of all that could go wrong if he embarked on this journey of ultimate honesty, but therein lay the revelation. Each time Jack resisted the impulse to share, he fortified the prison of silence wrapping around him. It was a profound conflict, to craft a narrative meant to inspire others, even if it risked his own vulnerabilities. The dual nature of his mission tugged at him. As he started to realize, his story could serve not solely as a confession but as a lifeline for others navigating similar dark waters, that he allowed himself a moment of clarity, contemplating the implications of what lay ahead. Could he weave his experiences into a tapestry that resonated not just with sadness but with resilience? By committing to this journey, he needed more than just strength, he required a commitment to transformation. No longer would he only be a bystander in his life, it was time to seize the reins. Fueled by necessity, Jack returned to the page, letting the narrative flow like a river breaking free of constraints. He typed feverishly, recalling the moments that clouded his memory. He would not sugarcoat the pain or the anger, each recollection had forged him, shaped him into the man he existed as today. In the midst of this cathartic storm, he unearthed a startling realization: within his scars lay a different kind of power. Perhaps, in his sharing of sorrow, he could illuminate the path for others shrouded in their own darkness. This unfolding was not just about him, it transcended the individual to touch the collective spirit of those who have faced loss. But with this knowledge burgeoned an urgency. His self-doubt was not merely an obstacle, it was a formidable adversary. The looming confrontation with his friends, particularly those who shared in the agony of Mark's loss, posed an intellectual and emotional puzzle. Would they accept him, scars and all? Or would his revelations fracture relationships he deeply valued? Jack felt a tremor in his gut, a warning that echoed loudly. He had to address that confrontation soon. He couldn't remain paralyzed by fear. If he continued to duck from the inevitable, he would remain stagnant, forever entangled in the vines of unaddressed remorse. The realization solidified within him that confronting it head-on might pave a new path not just for himself, but for others who felt equally bound by their histories. Suddenly, his thoughts were jarring, pulling him out from the depths of contemplation. There was no escaping the haunting eyes of those who once loved Mark. Their potential reaction loomed like shadows at the edge of his newfound resolve. He would need to prepare himself, not just to write but to meet these individuals. Would he be able to stand before them and own his truth? With renewed vigor, Jack began drafting a letter. It was his first step toward addressing his friends, a prelude to his broader revelations. He wanted to share not just the weight of his past but how it intersected with theirs. A siren call of vulnerability surged through him, one that urged him not to back away from the precipice. As he shaped the words with care, he realized he wasn't merely inviting them to bear witness, he was also challenging them to confront their own truths, the triumphs and tribulations they had buried over time. After finishing his letter, Jack leaned back, breathless yet exhilarated. The moment of confrontation had arrived within him, but it was merely part of his broader revelation. Tomorrow he would reach out, and with it, he would delve into the myriad complexities of connection, vulnerability, and forgiveness. That night, as sleep finally tugged gently at his eyelids, he prepared mentally for the encounters awaiting him. Would he gather the courage to face the very truth he had worked so hard to avoid? Jack's pulse quickened at the thought. The time to face his friends and himself was drawing near. Would he embrace the collective healing that lay just beyond the threshold of his fears? Jack stood in front of the group of veterans he had summoned, their faces a mix of anticipation and concern. His heart raced as he faced them in the community hall, a space echoing with shared histories. The walls were lined with photos of soldiers, many of whom he had fought alongside. They were not just pictures, they were remnants of battles, laughter, and hard-earned camaraderie. Today, those memories took on a new purpose. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment crushing down on him, yet an unshakable resolve anchored him to that very spot. Jack had journeyed through his fears to arrive at this moment of potential transformation both for himself and the men and women who had fought alongside him. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice steady, rising above the skeptical whispers in the room. "I know the topic that unites us all holds memories that may be painful." The room fell quiet as they listened, his honesty cutting through hesitant barriers. "For too long, our stories have been silenced. But, we owe it to ourselves, to each other, and to those who didn't make it back to uncover the truth of what we've endured." A sense of camaraderie flickered, and he sensed an energetic pulse igniting around him. It was a mixture of hope and a challenge, a collective breath preparing for deeper truths. He continued, "Today, I want us to share not just for nostalgia, but to amplify our experiences so they resonate louder than any indifference." The line of tension dissipated slightly, eyes glimmering with recognition of shared struggle. Jack took a deep breath, filling the space with the narrative he had woven with courage. Each name he spoke, Tom, Brian, and the others, brought forth memories painted in shades of bravery and sacrifice. They were more than allies, they were part of a story that beckoned to be heard. In the midst of recounting tales of service and sacrifice, Jack ventured into uncharted waters, the emotions he had hidden away for too long. He shared his own struggle with guilt over Mark, allowing the vulnerability he had feared so deeply to unravel. As he spoke, a hush enveloped the room, the gravity of his words struck a chord. "I thought by burying my past, I could protect the memories of those who had fallen. But denial only served to distance me from this brotherhood. Today, I choose not to shy away from the darkness. I want us to stand together in our truths, to confront our pain with the strength that once carried us through battle." Silence hung in the air until the first voice broke through, a deep and familiar timbre. "You're not alone in this, Jack." It was Brian, sitting toward the back, his eyes sincere. "We've all carried our burdens." That single statement ignited a surge of courage among the assembled veterans. One by one, they began to share stories once stifled by shame, grief interwoven with laughter, resilience emerging from regret. In this moment, Jack watched his fears dissolve, replaced by shared vulnerability and connection. The stories circulated, each retelling serving to weave them closer together, a tapestry of collective strength. As the session drew to a close, Jack felt a weight lift from his chest, like leaden shackles breaking apart. The applause that erupted felt not only like recognition for his bravery but affirmation of the collective resolve that had formed among them. They were not simply recounting their pasts, they were reclaiming them, together. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Jack emerged from the undertow of doubt and shame, elevated by the camaraderie that had sparked in the hall. Each story shared was a step taken towards healing, not just for himself, but a catalyst for others to confront their demons as well. Now standing tall, Jack realized he had achieved something beyond what he initially set out to do. He hadn't just ignited a conversation, he had built a community ready to support one another in reclaiming the narratives that mattered. And in that affirmation of belonging and understanding, he found his own sense of self-worth reinvigorated. As he smiled at the faces surrounding him, Jack understood he had transitioned from a place of shame to one of pride. He didn't just carry a uniform, he carried the voices of his brothers and sisters, committed to making sure they would not fade away into silence again. The journey wasn't over, there were still battles to face, an advocacy campaign, pressing local leaders for recognition, and perhaps even speaking engagements to share their messages with wider audiences. Yet, each challenge was a testament to his growth. Jack walked out of the hall later that day, the warmth of sunlight a stark contrast to the cold shadows he'd emerged from. He looked ahead, envisioning a path full of purpose, the foundation he had built strong enough to endure whatever lay ahead. Jack had not only triumphed over his fears, he had proved that standing together, sharing truths, and wielding vulnerability leads to liberation. He no longer just remembered his past, he had forged it into a powerful beacon of resilience and hope. Now every veteran had a voice, every voice had a story, and every story deserved to be heard. This was just the beginning. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Seriously, it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending, and share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now to be part of these transformative journeys. Don't wait even one more second to share.